Hey everyone, this is David D. Hilster. You may know me as the Dissident Science YouTube channel guy, but I'm also hosting the Saturday Science Chats. Franklin Hugh, if you expect to see him here, he's been doing that for many years, so I'm giving him some well-deserved time off. But today we have a fantastic show today. I'm telling you this. I will say this. I can say it because it's my opinion. And I've been studying expansion tectonics for quite a while, over a decade. And I will say to you, in my opinion, and this is my humble opinion, we're going to be talking to the most important geologists ever. I'm not talking about of how do you say, our generation ever. This book that he just wrote, I'll be talking about this a little bit. It is fantastic. But again, let me introduce everyone who is on our Dissident Science YouTube channel who's not used to seeing this. I'm starting to broadcast live to Dissident Science, so all my subscribers, hello to you. Heck, it keeps growing. We're almost to 3,300 subscribers. I appreciate it. If you like these videos, please subscribe, hit like. We're broadcasting live to Dissident Science YouTube channel, to the CMPS YouTube channel, and to the CMPS Facebook. So I welcome everyone. And this is sponsored by the John Chappell Philosophy Society and Dissident Science YouTube channels. We are, let me go to the next slide. Our CMPS, the Chappell Natural Philosophy Mission, what are we as an organization? To be an organization that above all promotes critical thinking without malice, to be an organization that supports, publishes, and promotes serious scientific work outside mainstream science, to provide a forum for open debate about modern topics in physics, cosmology, philosophy, and mathematics, to provide a forum for presenting serious papers and theories without fear of censorship, to be run and controlled in its entirety by its paid membership, including the election of directors and its members. In fact, some of you who may know our organization from the older name MPA, we went through a restructuring, and that's why we started the CMPS, so that it would be truly run by our members. So here we go. We're going to keep going here. If you want to join our community and join in, you can go to our naturalphilosophy.org website, and you can see there we have our website that's brand new. It's just almost like Facebook, but it's for scientists. We have lots of groups there, interesting groups where you can do where you can talk to people about like interests. We have groups on expansion tectonics. In fact, you can see it right down here. That's one of the groups. In fact, James Maxlow has promised me he will sign up and will be available for questions you have on that. So, and we also have other websites. Okay, just a minute. I'll be right back in a second. Quiet. I am sorry, I got a yapping dog there. This is live TV, as they say, more or less. Okay, how to participate and support. Sign up on naturalphilosophy.org. You consider becoming a member. Our memberships the annual memberships are annual, and they start at pretty reasonable, but they do pay for everything you see here. And sorry about the dog, guys. But this is the real world we live in today anyways. Everybody recognize that. It's not easy doing this when having a yapping dog in the background. But participate in the community discussions on our website, post news and happenings about us on social media. So you can do those things. If you want to take a look more about what's going on, our websites, you can take a look at our community website at naturalphilosophy.org, our online magazine, sciencewoke.org. You can also go to our Wikipedia, which is the Natural Philosophy Wikipedia, which has over 10,000 pages. And coming is our Chappell University, where we're going to be teaching courses in natural philosophy. And those courses will be offered for free. To be taught, and I'm hoping our guest today will start a course. I'm going to be working with him. He's at that point in his life where he has to start teaching about what he has given the world, which is amazing. And today we're going to be having a talk by the premier person. This is a fact, the premier person in expansion tectonics. And in fact, I'm pretty sure James Maxlow is a person who the person who actually coined the word expansion tectonics. So, if you don't know James Maxlow, he is a retired professional geologist who has worked as a mining and exploration geologist throughout much of Australia. During that time, I changed this just this morning. Sorry about that. He returned to Curtin University of Technology in Perth, Western Australia, to study and research expansion tectonics. From this research, he gained I got this, he wrote this himself. I tried to change it, but sorry about that. For this research, he gained a Master of Science degree in 1995, followed by a PhD in 2002. So that's quite an accomplishment in itself. And if you haven't and don't know about his book, his latest book, in my opinion, the most important book ever written in geology, and I don't say that lightly. I honestly believe so. I think part of it, the reason is because he had to really write it all himself. And he doesn't have an entire university and all the geological societies around the world and around the universities supporting this. So he's pretty much on his own, and that's amazing how he put this together with one person. But it's called Beyondplate Tectonics, Unsettling Settled Science. Again, you can see sort of the idea that we critical thinkers look for truth, and that usually upsets the mainstream of science. I'll read a little bit about the book. Beyondplate Tectonics signposts that this is something more advanced than basic academic courses might cover, while the subtitle of Unsettling Settled Science confirms our suspicions. The whole book is all revolutionary and new, unsettling to anyone who thinks there will be no more major revisions in the earth sciences. It is just as stimulating to those people who understand that scientific discovery will never be finished. It's just as stimulating to those people who understand that scientific discovery will never be finished, and that's totally true. So, that's sort of gives you an introduction to what we have today. And I have standing by from Perth, Australia. Right now it's 10:08 p.m. in the morning here in Florida. But in course, we have Dr. James Maxlow with us. And he is in Perth, Australia. And it is 10:08 p.m., correct?
Correct.
Well, welcome, James. I really want to thank you for coming on here and actually speaking. He had mentioned that he was going to be speaking. He had to put together a talk today. And tell us a little bit about what you're going to be talking about.
I'll be talking about recent to Permian small Earth modeling. During the research years I did at university that you mentioned, I was self-funded. Had very little help from academia, self-funded, worked mainly from home, and I purpose-built these physical models of the Earth using modern observational data, in particular geological mapping of the world. David, do you want me to start my presentation?
Yeah. If you want to do, maybe if one of the things you could do, maybe let's assume that a lot of people here aren't as familiar with geology. Maybe you could put this talk into context for an average critical thinker that comes to our websites who loves science. Put this in context. That way, when you start going with your slides, maybe that will give them a better understanding of getting into this specific talk.
Yeah, well, the book Beyondplate Tectonics there really, I tried to dumb it down from mainstream academic papers, etc., which don't get published. Any papers that I submit to the mainstream journals don't get published because it's just too controversial. So in order to get this across to mainstream, I dumb it down so most people can understand what I'm talking about. But this particular book is directed mainly to, say, undergraduates and people with a bent towards natural history, et cetera, basic geology. It's very easy to read. I've had some great revisions on it and great coverage from people who have read it and find it very easy to read. But again, you really do need some basic understanding of geology. And in my talk, I do go into geology, but I'll try not to be too academic.
No problem. What I'm going to do is I'm going to let you go. I'm going to jump out of here, and if you need any help, I'll see. But thank you so much again, and I can say to people that his book is very readable, especially if you're a person who loves science. You get the hang of it pretty quickly. I mean, it's just so fascinating, the whole idea of expansion tectonics, that excitement alone keeps you going. But I read through the whole book, and it's quite easy to read. I'm not a geologist by anything. So thank you very much for doing the talk. And I introduce you Dr. James Maxlow on expansion tectonics, recent to Permian small Earth modeling.
Okay, thank you, David. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first of a series of 4 podcasts introducing expansion tectonics. What is expansion tectonics, you may well ask? David alluded to the fact that I actually invented this name, and it was originally invented as global expansion tectonics, and it was the title of my master's thesis in '95. It's subsequently been shortened to expansion tectonics now. Expansion tectonics is primarily a geology-based tectonic modelling process, which utilises modern global observational data to allow the Earth to tell its own story. My presentation today is based on 25 years of PhD and post-PhD research. This research has culminated in publication of a number of books, the latest of which, as David has pointed out, is called Beyondplate Tectonics, Unsettling Settled Science. In my latest book, I look beyond the achievements of conventional plate tectonics in order to show you a uniquely different way of physically modelling the Earth's ancient crustal plates. This modelling uses modern geological mapping of the oceans and continents in order to constrain plate assemblage at Earth's ancient radius back in time. From this small Earth modelling study, an extensive range of additional global observational data is then used to quantify the outcomes of this study. In this presentation, it is important to appreciate that what I will be presenting is a data modelling exercise, not a theory modelling exercise. In other words, I make no assumptions about the Earth, and I do not apply any premises to the data. All I will be doing is modelling global geological mapping and observational data without constraining the data to any preconceived theory. It is important to also appreciate that I am not modelling plate tectonics, so therefore I do not need to constrain the mapping or observational data to a constant radius Earth premise, nor do I need to consider additional ad hoc constraints in order to make the data fit. All I am presenting here are spherical models of the ancient Earth to test a concept and to allow the Earth to tell its own story. In this podcast, I will be focusing specifically on modelling the seafloor crustal plates in order to create spherical scale models of the ancient Earth extending from the present day back to the Permian. This study is summarised in the first 3 models from the right, shown on screen. Modelling beyond the Permian back to the early Archean at far left will be presented in a separate podcast. The small Earth modelling study presented here is based on the Geological Map of the World, as first published by the Commission for the Geological Map of the World and UNESCO in 1990, shown here in moleweed projection. This map is based on an extensive program of seafloor magnetic and bathymetric mapping, accompanied by age dating carried out throughout all of the oceans during the 1950s to late 1980s. For those not familiar with the term plates, the Earth's crust is arranged in a series of 7 or 8 major and a number of minor plates. The outer edges of these plates currently coincide with the pink stripes shown in each of the oceans. These plates are made up of both continental and seafloor crusts and are generally centered over each of the continents. The colors shown on this map represent what I call time-dependent geology, where the colored seafloor stripes, for example, represent the preserved growth history of each of the modern plates as basaltic lava is intruded along each of the mid-ocean ridge spreading zones. The ages of each colored seafloor stripe coincide with the major geological epochs, extending from the pink Pleistocene stripe located along the mid-ocean ridges through to the blue Jurassic stripes, just here, located adjacent to the continents. What this means is that the yellow seafloor stripes, for example, located between the younger red stripes and the older orange stripes, represent basaltic lava that was progressively intruded along the ancient mid-ocean ridge spreading zones during the Miocene epoch, extending in time from 5.3 to 23 million years ago. 5.3, 23. During that time, the younger red and pink basaltic rocks, respectively, did not exist. During the Miocene, the two adjoining yellow stripes were then joined together throughout all of the oceans and remained joined along their common mid-ocean ridges during this interval of time, progressively widening over time. Similarly, the colors within each of the continents represent rocks that were formed during the major geological periods and eras, and coincide with the distribution of the ancient cratons, origins, and basins. What this modern geological mapping shows is that all oceans contain a mid-ocean ridge, shown here as the centrally located pink stripes in each ocean. The younger seafloor crust coincides with new mantle-derived basaltic lava currently being extruded along each of the mid-ocean ridges. In all cases, seafloor crusts increase in age away from the mid-ocean ridges, as shown by the symmetric growth histories and red directional arrows for each ocean. The oldest exposed seafloor crust for all oceans is early Jurassic, around 170 million years old, and shown here as pale blue crust located mainly adjacent to the continents. Of particular importance that all oceans are increasing their surface areas away from their mid-ocean ridges, as again shown by the symmetric growth histories and red directional arrows for each ocean. Putting aside any preconceived premises or assumptions, from this mapping data, it is logical to conclude that when moving back in time, all plate reconstructions must be reversed and assemblages must strictly adhere to the geology preserved in this map. That is, the geology must be reverse engineered back in time. In other words, all mid-ocean ridge basaltic lava must be progressively returned back to the mantle from where it came from. Similarly, all continents must move closer together in accordance with this preserved plate history, and in doing so, close off each of the oceans in the directions shown by the magenta arrows. So what does all this mean? In this animation, the geology map of the world is shown in spherical format. The globe will rotate a few times before removing each coloured seafloor stripe in succession along each of the mid-ocean ridge spreading zones, simulating moving back in time. What I have done in this animation is to simply remove each coloured stripe in turn without forcing the plate data into a preconceived Atlantic Ocean assemblage. By doing this, the bedrock mapping highlights that In addition to the Atlantic Ocean, each of the other oceans can just as easily be closed off along their respective mid-ocean ridge spreading zones, and each adjoining continent can also just as easily be moved closer together. The point being made here is that forcing data into a preconceived Atlantic Ocean assemblage is based on a 1960s assumption that Earth radius and surface area have always remained constant. In the rest of this presentation, this assumption is simply ignored, and the same modern plate data will be reassembled on smaller radius Earth models in order to investigate what happens when we successively close off all the oceans along each of their mid-ocean ridge spreading zones. In contrast to constraining plate assemblage as to the Atlantic Ocean only, the small Earth models in this next animation will rotate once before removing each coloured seafloor stripe in turn and reassembling the remaining plates together on smaller radius Earth models. As can be appreciated, this represents a unique method of modelling and constraining this readily available geological mapping data. This animation simulates returning the intruded seafloor lava as well as a proportion of the atmospheric gases and seawater from each of the oceans back to the mantle, from where they originally came from. By doing this, each of the continents are then moved closer together, in effect, reverse engineering the preserved growth history back in time. As can be readily seen in this animation, the remaining crustal plates assembled together on each successive model with a single unique plate fit, estimated to be better than 99% fit. You will also note that each model has a north and south pole, along with an equator, scaled from these pole locations. These poles were plotted directly from the International Paleopole database of McElhaney and Locke, 1996, where each of the published poles plot as diametrically opposed north and south magnetic poles for each model, as they should do. On these models, by the Triassic period, continental and marine sedimentary basins begin to merge to form a global network of basins coinciding with relatively shallow continental seas. These marine sedimentary basins, shown as white on each model, represent a network of low-lying regions where the sediment, eroded from the exposed land surfaces, accumulates. Logic dictates that by moving further back in time, this erosion process must also be reversed, and all young eroded sediments must be progressively returned to the former land surfaces. By returning these sediments to their former land surfaces, it is then feasible for the ancient Earth radius to be further reduced back in time, and older continental crust more tightly assembled on pre-Triassic models. By continuing to model back in time to the late Permian period, about 250 million years ago, on this model, all young seafloor volcanic crust, plus most of the marine sediments deposited along the continental shelves, have been removed. The distribution of published ancient continental seas are also shown in blue, and the modern continental outlines are highlighted as black dashed lines. As distinct from conventional practice, what is shown on this model is that all continental crusts unite precisely with a single unique plate fit to form a global Pangean supercontinent during the late Permian period, at around 50% of the present Earth radius. Each of the small Earth models also show that large Panthalassa, Tethys, and Iapetus oceans are not required during model construction. These oceans were instead replaced by lesser continental Panthalassa, Iapetus, and Tethys seas, which represent precursors to the modern Pacific and Atlantic oceans, as well as ancient sedimentary basins located on many of the present-day continents. On these post-Permian models, the transition from ancient seas to modern oceans only came about when the Pangean supercontinent shown here, first started to rupture and break up to form the modern continents and intervening modern oceans. It is envisaged that breakup then initiated draining of waters from the ancient continental seas into the newly opening modern oceans, plus expulsion of new waters from along the newly formed mid-ocean ridge spreading zones. The preliminary conclusions drawn from these increasing radius small Earth models is that there is no requirement for random, non-predictable, multiple plate fit assemblage options as ill-defined plate histories. Nor is there a requirement for extensive, largely hypothetical ancient oceans to comply with a constant surface area premise, or for the fragmentation of any of the modern continents to comply with paleomagnetic apparent polar wander studies. Instead, it is shown that the ancient continental crusts tightly wrap around and fully enclose an ancient smaller Earth. These continental crusts then assemble against continents that were otherwise not previously considered to be related on conventional assemblages, which, in turn, presents a multitude of new opportunities to study global data distributions. In addition to being able to assemble the mapping data on small Earth models, the information contained on the geological map of the world provides a means to uniquely measure ancient Earth surface areas, and from this to derive ancient Earth radii back in time to at least the Triassic period, some 200 million years ago. The results of this exercise are shown here in the form of a graph of ancient Earth radius relative to geological time, and similarly a derived formula for calculating Earth radius at any moment in time. The red dots shown on this graph represent the locations of each spherical small Earth model constructed during this research. However, in this presentation, I am only highlighting the past 200 million years of Earth history as defined by opening of the seafloor crusts. The remaining models will be introduced in a separate podcast. The locations of each model constructed are dictated by the time scales represented by the colours shown on the published geological map. This graph shows that the rate of change in Earth radius over time is exponential, with the rates of change varying from microns per year during the first 70% of geological history, increasing steadily throughout the remaining time to a rate of 22 millimeters per year increase in Earth radius for the present day. By extrapolating forward in time, it is calculated that the Earth will be of a similar size to the giant planets by around 500 million years into the future. From this graph, it is envisaged that crustal development is an evolving process intimately related to changing Earth radius, surface area, and surface curvature over time. This process commenced during the early Archean, some 4,000 million years ago, with an extremely long period of slow to steady continental crustal stretching. This stretching was then followed by a period of steady to rapidly increasing crustal stretching, leading to crustal rupture, and finally to breakup of the ancient Pangaean supercontinental crust around 250 million years ago to form the modern continents and oceans, as demarcated by the vertical dashed line. This entire process was unimaginably slow and protracted, matched only by the unimaginably long span of geological time available since original formation and stabilization of the Earth. To preempt your query as to where all the extra matter comes from, of significance to this research that in year 2000, 4 identical Cluster 2 satellites were launched by the European Space Agency. These satellites were launched to study the impact of the Sun's activity on the near-Earth space environment by flying in formation to gather data around the Earth. For the first time in space history, this mission was able to collect 3-dimensional information about how the solar wind interacts with the magnetosphere, how it affects near-Earth space, and how our giant spherical magnet called Earth reacts with particles within the solar wind. This new information and related discoveries were considered by the European Space Agency's project scientists to be of great importance because they showed how the Earth's magnetosphere can be penetrated by solar particles. The Earth's magnetosphere is now shown to be full of trapped plasma, comprising charged electron and proton particles originating from the solar wind as it passes the Earth. This flow of plasma into the magnetosphere increases with increase in solar wind density and speed, as well as increases in turbulence in the solar wind. In addition to penetrating the magnetosphere, it has also been shown that the plasma travels down along the Earth's magnetic field lines within the auroral zones, entering the Earth at each of the poles. This European study suggested to the scientists that penetration of plasma may be a lot more common than was previously known, and possibly represents a means for the constant flow of charged electrons and protons into the Earth. The most important question that should then come to mind is, what happens to these electrons and protons, the very building blocks of all matter in the universe, when they enter the Earth? The answer to this question is, of course, that they must increase the mass and radius of the Earth over time. In summary, it is concluded that the global geological mapping presented here more than adequately demonstrates that a Permian to recent increasing radius Earth is indeed a viable and demonstrable tectonic process. From a geological perspective, at no point has any fundamental physical law been violated. The commonly held presumption that Earth radius has remained constant throughout time is simply removed, and instead, the Earth is allowed to tell its own story. In order to create Permian to recent small Earth models, I simply removed from the Earth what was not previously there. Intruded seafloor volcanic lava, intruded magma, and eroded sediments, to end up with a Pangean Earth comprising a complete assemblage of continental crustal components. The seafloor mapping shown on the geological map of the world was initially used to accurately constrain the location and assemblage of all seafloor crustal plates on smaller radius Earth models. Assemblage of these seafloor crustal plates consistently showed that each plate assembles with a single unique fit, with all plates assembling with a high degree of precision along each of the mid-ocean ridge spreading zones. It is considered that if these crustal plate assemblages were mere coincidence, it would be expected that the seafloor mapping, as well as geological and geographical evidence from adjoining continents, would not match across plate boundaries on any of the small Earth models constructed. This evidence instead shows that seafloor bedrock mapping does indeed match across the plate boundaries. All continental sedimentary basins do merge to form a global network of ancient continental seas. Orogenic and fold mountain belts coincide, and ancient crustal regions assemble together precisely. This assemblage of seafloor crustal plates was shown to extend for 200 million years back in time to the early Triassic period, and demonstrated the viability and uniqueness of a post-Triassic small Earth modelling process. The small Earth modelling presented in this research then suggests that plausible alternative models and mechanisms based on the extensive range of modern global tectonic data and evidence must then be actively encouraged, not discouraged. In this context, we should then at least consider that modern plate tectonic observational data may well be better suited to an increasing radius Earth scenario, before continuing to unscientifically reject this proposal out of hand. Modelling also gives encouragement towards extending small Earth modelling studies further back in time. In my next podcast, I will be utilising continental geological mapping to constrain crustal assemblages back to the early Archean. So thank you for your interest in expansion tectonics. And for those seeking more information, please visit my website or contact me at my email address shown on screen. Thank you very much. Over to you, David.
All right. Thank you so much. I put the website up there. This is so great. Like I said, I don't even care if I give anybody a chance to talk with him because I have so many comments and questions. Great. I think that was a great presentation, especially for people who are really not real familiar with what expansion tectonics is. We do have some a comment. Here's from Ralph B. Excellent stuff. So obviously, people are enjoying this, but I think it's most amazing to me, James, is that when I watch, if anybody wants to go and see how ridiculous, no offense, plate tectonics is, go to the internet and find. There's not many of them. I've tried. There's not many. How do you say? Videos or animations or modeling of the plate tectonics movements. I have seen some of those videos. So you go search for plate tectonics, shifting or moving, right? And I'm sure you've seen them. It is absolutely an exercise in farce. I mean, it is. I have never seen one of them that makes any sense to me. Have you seen? Have you seen some of those animations?
Oh yes. Oh yes.
I mean, I think what happens is they have all this data, right? One of the things about what we call model revolution, Kuhn talks about this very clearly. We have normal science. There's model drift. We have model crisis, model revolution, and then back to normal science. Well, we have, model drift. Now we have model crisis, because if you look at the data and you try to, how do you say, match up all the data that they have on a fixed radius Earth. I've seen them, they'll have the components come together and they'll do this and then they'll, because they're trying to fit in all the data that they have by flora and fauna and geological. Whereas, for instance, one of the things I'm sure you saw, I think it was last year, it was recent, where I saw all of a sudden all these articles about the the eastern side of Australia matches up with the western side of Canada, the United States, and that just drove the plate tectonics crazy. How could that be? I mean, how do people come about? How do you deal with that? Because how do you think these people even try to deal with it? They just have to close their eyes. I mean, after a while, you get so much data against it. If I was a plate tectonics person or geologist, I would just say, guys, this is wrong. There's something really wrong here.
You're absolutely right, David. And as I'll introduce a slide in my next talk, which highlights some of those assemblages that you're talking about. And plate tectonics really is driven by paleomagnetics, the study of the magnetics preserved in rocks.
Right.
And so it's out of the hands of geologists, and most paleomagneticians are geophysicists to an extent, with very little training and understanding in geology, excusing some of them that are actually trained in that. But anyway, they absolutely use this paleomagnetic stuff religiously. And you put a number of researchers together with the same data and they'll come up with different plate fits. What I've emphasized in this talk and my next talk, when you use the geological data and mapping data, you only get one chance. You only get one fit. You don't get the ability to move it around a bit and assemble it somewhere else. You only get one fit. Each and every model that I construct, there's one fit. Whereas plate tectonics, as you alluded to, there's a multitude of fits for the same thing. And the assemblage of Australia, Eastern Australia towards the west coast of the North America, that comes naturally to expansion tectonics. And as a number of my colleagues have mentioned this in a number of papers, that plate tectonists got very excited about this assemblage of North America and West Australia. And as you well know, I used to live in Brisbane, and when I visited you in Vancouver a few years ago, 200 million years ago, I could have walked there.
Exactly. I was going to say that. I was going to say, man, it would have been much easier and much cheaper to get you there. But
Brisbane
yeah,
to Los Angeles, I think they were within walking distance anyway. But yes, yes, it constantly amazes me about people who don't look beyond these cartoon assemblages.
Yeah, it's just ridiculous. Here we got a bunch of questions starting to come up here, and I can see on the screen, and these are natural questions. Was water volume constant? Now, one of the things is, I know in your slides, obviously you show what's really maybe if I can bring that up. I'm going to bring up the slides again. Once you back up to that graph where the exponential growth is, and I think that will help answer this question for this person saying about the volumes and water. It's a common question, so I'll get that out of the way there. And just so other people know, if you look at, if I understand this right, is the brown part? Whoops, the brown part is.
I'll just go to this.
Right, but go back to that graph. If you can go back to that graph, and then I'll let you go there on your explanation. But if you go to that graph, just for people to know, the blue is water, correct?
No, the blue is mantle. The orange
is mantle. You know what? What if you were to map the water volume on this? It would be really, really small, I guess, right?
Yeah, beyond scale. Look, I'll take over there, David.
Yes.
The seafloor crusts are essentially volcanic rocks.
Right.
And unbeknownst to most people, the seafloor crust is actually exposed mantle. You get the basaltic lava coming up through the mid-ocean ridges and cooling at surface. That is mantle-derived volcanic lava. So therefore, that is cooled and quenched mantle. Not a lot of people realize that. So you have separate continental crusts and separate oceanic seafloor crusts.
So according to this graph, we are at half and half, right? I mean, we went from almost none. We went from none.
Yeah, that's schematic, of course, that there. And there's a bit of license there. But let me finish. Okay. Basaltic lava, or basalts in particular, they retain 15 to 20, I think it is, weight percent volatiles within their crystal lattices. And the volatiles are water and gases. Mm-hmm. And so 15 to 20% weight by volume, weight. Once that is reaches the surface, that those volatiles are expelled. They devolatilize and they add to the ocean. So the answer to that question is the volume of the seawaters actually increase in time.
Okay, and so I want to clear. Yeah. So what you're saying, I just want to make sure. I'll let you go again. Is that you're saying, because one of the things is you see those black smokers and you see water pouring out. Is that water also being added to the ocean?
That is the water that's being added to it along the full length of those mid-ocean ridge zones. And as well as that, there's gases to add to the atmosphere and metals and all sorts of other things going with it. Sulfides,
so that's coming from the mantle, and it's
coming from the basaltic rocks via the mantle. Yes, not directly from the mantle. They're devolatilizing. It's like opening what you people call a soda pop, soft drink bottle, a can of soft drink, whatever you call it there. You click the lid and Out
Right.
comes the gases. That's devolatilization. And that's the
Right.
same, very similar to what the basalts do. It happens to the basalts. The volatile elements, the gases and the water, devolatilize. They percolate out of those basalts.
Right. And that's one of the biggest questions people get right away, because we hear in school over and over and over two things. One, we don't seem to be able to account for all the water on it, and maybe it was comets, right? But if you do calculations, it just doesn't make sense. And the other thing is, what's really the other question I have that's related to this, and actually I think I've never asked you this, is that it seems there is a balance between when as more and more mantle gets built, new mantle gets built, this blue area, it's bringing in water, but it's not like what's the ratio between the water level and the new mantle coming in? Because if there was lots of water coming in, either are the seas rising, or are they falling during this time because of the ratio of water in that mantle?
It's currently not keeping pace with increase in radius. So contrary to what the powers that be tell us, sea level is actually falling rather than rising.
Right.
The rise in sea level they're talking about is an apparent rise.
Right.
And as you increase Earth radius, the continental crusts try to keep their surface curvature. So what happens is the outer edges around the outer edges of the continents are depressed, become depressed as the central areas of each of the continents rises. Eventually that will fail and it'll re-equilibrate again. But at the moment, the outer edges are being pressed down into the mantle rocks because of the increase in surface curvature. And the seawater, the ocean water, the levels appears at some apparent increase in apparent rise, but in actual fact, it's a decrease.
Okay.
If you go, you can see this in reality over most of the world. We have here in Perth, we have raised marine platforms 3 meters above present sea level, and that's 1,000 years ago. That sea level was 3 meters higher. Back in Sicily, where we had a conference there a good few years ago, the ancient port there is now, whereas at one time, 1,000 years ago, they were sailing their ships in there and in their harbour, and now it is 3 meters above sea level. Even in the States, I noticed there along the Californian coastline, things like that. Right. So yes, the increase, the volume of water is increasing, but it's not keeping pace with the increase in radius.
Right. Now you were going back to a slide before that, before I rudely interrupted you.
Oh, that's all right. Yeah, that's all right. I was going to talk to that one rather than this one, but that's all right. In my next podcast, I will show a series of that same slide, but a series of them showing the distribution of the ancient continental seas back in time, and you can see the definite increase in surface area of those seas. And then once you get rupture and breakup of the continents and introduction of this new water from the mid-ocean ridge spreading centers, there's a rapid increase in the volume and superficial area of the waters over time.
Okay.
That's all I was going to say.
Okay. Now, this is another question, and it brings up your comment that I thought that was really interesting. If I'm going to bring this up again, if you look at this, this just hit me during your talk. If you look at this graph and you look at that 500 is 500 million years ago, right?
Yeah.
Now you're saying that we're going to be the size of the giant gas planets. If you just take that 500 and flip it over to that side. That's right. Quite astonishing. So you get a lot of different questions about this. And do other planets grow?
They do, and it's not a coincidence that the giant planets are strongly magnetic,
right?
Whereas the the inner planets are essentially non-magnetic. So the planets that are strongly magnetic and the Earth is moderately magnetic, they're the ones that's attracting these solar particles that's emanating from the sun via the solar wind. So it just seems that these giant spherical magnets called planets are attracting all this new matter, these particles, and increasing in size and volume. So that's why I can confidently say that the Earth, because it's a giant magnet, spherical magnet, will, in 500 million years' time, will eventually reach the size of the giant planets. Whereas Mercury's, the Venuses, and the Mars of planets, and even the Moon, our Moon, are essentially non-magnetic. So they're not increasing in size.
So it also bodes to the idea that eventually, during that between now and 500 million years, the Earth, that the chemical processes going on will eventually let go an immense amount of gases and things, because the gas giants have solid cores, but they are also obviously surrounded by lots of gases. Is that something you also see, or have not really spent a lot of time on? Because James, you can't do everything. You can't do everything.
I've spent a lot of time thinking about it, but it's feasible. Most of the giant planets are shrouded in gases, so it's logical to conclude that Earth will end up that way as well.
Okay. Here's another question from Franklin, who has hosted these for many years. He says, I have not seen the exponential expansion. Any idea why that would be?
I'm not.
I mean, I think what it means is that people thought maybe that expansion would be linear.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, for instance, I mean, to give an example people know, is that 250 million years ago, the crust started to crack, and before that, as you said, it was just an incredibly slow process. But all of a sudden, now we're heading on that curve. What would be some of your expert opinion about what that is?
It is an interesting question when you think about it properly. And I liken that to civil engineering. In civil engineering, they will do testing on steel bars and various aluminium, etc., where they have a round bar or a bar of metal in some chucks, paired chucks, and then stretch it. And
right.
They before it breaks, it is an exponential. It forms an exponential curve, just like I've shown on mine, on the Earth, where you get a very slow atomic creep, starting to get stretching of the molecules, then tearing and shredding of the molecules, and then break up and dismembering of the shreds and particles and grains of metal. And then ultimately you get that bang. And then that's where the exponential curve shows a rapid increase in the vertical axis. And that is roughly what I'm seeing in that exponential curve, where it's a very, very long, protracted, very slow rate, microns per year over billions of years. The first 2.5 billion years history, radius only increases by 60 kilometers, and by that stage you're still looking at only less than the thickness of a human hair per year increase. And then the steady increase in the gradient of that curve is where the crust is starting to stretch. The sedimentary basins that I'll introduce in the next talk, they're like, you can imagine like being plasticine. They're being stretched and stretched and stretched. And then you get to the point where I've shown here at the 250 million year mark, where that crust cannot stretch anymore, and bang, the crusts break up, and you get a relatively rapid rise in the rate of increase in radius over time. This is derived purely and simply from the measuring the surface areas of those features in the geological map of the world, and that map is exactly reproduced from that mapping data.
Okay. We'll put up another question. This one is Dr. Maxlow. If you have looked at the Hawaiian Emperor chain bend 450 million years ago in relation to your work with expansion tectonics, I'd be very interested here to know your thoughts on that bend.
I'm not fully familiar with, being Australian, I'm not fully familiar with the Hawaiian Islands, etc. But how can I explain it? That part of the Pacific Ocean is a very old seafloor crustal area. To the west of that Hawaiian chain, you get a very, very large area of Jurassic seafloor crusts, greater than 170 million years ago. And at that time, the radius of the Earth was, say, about 60% of what it is now. So the surface curvature at that time, it's like, I liken it to, say, the skull cap, a Jewish skull cap. You fit it on your head, but if you take that skull cap and put it on, say, a baseball, not a baseball, having a
Basketball.
Seniors moment, basketball here, it'll sit, it'll be upstanding. And so in order to maintain that surface curvature of that basketball, that crust has to also stretch and distort. And surrounding that is a large area of Cretaceous volcanic crusts as well. But what I'm alluding to is, as well as the mid-ocean ridge, intrusion of these volcanic lavas along the mid-ocean ridge, in that Pacific area, you also get fractures and cracks and whatnot in that older seafloor crust, and these form channelways where lava can migrate to the surface. And the Hawaiian chain, and also the guy roots, the chains of mountains throughout that area of the Pacific, are essentially leakage, volcanoes leaking from the mantle to the surface. The actual bend, the continents are, because of the increasing surface curvature and area, they're constantly jostling and shuffling around anyway. So, and North America relative to, say, Asia is actually rotating what you call counterclockwise. The North America is counterclockwise. So there is a rotational element in North America and the North Pacific region of that region up through there, which may explain why there's a bend in that Hawaiian chain, as you ask.
Okay, I'm going to be putting some more up here. Here's a question. I'm sorry, grabbing folks in random order. I'm sorry, I'm not getting these in order. But could there be upside down mountain ridges and the hotspot hit one and deflected? Is that, I think maybe this was related to your Hawaiian, what the question was. So upside down mountain ridges. I mean, meaning as is the mantle, we have the mountains on top, right? Do we have thicker parts below as well?
On expansion tectonic Earth, mountains are not formed by collision or subduction.
Right.
They are formed by, well, as a professor colleague of mine, he's written quite a number of books on mountains. He's essentially a geomorphologist, geographer, and he's studies mountains throughout the world. He and his another professor friend have studied mountains throughout the world, and what they noticed is mountains are, you can see crumpling in the mountains, the folding and thrusting and faulting, etc. But that is not formed by collision. I don't want to go into it in too much detail because it's not controversial. It is controversial from a plate tectonic perspective, but there's a different mechanism, and I would actually have to introduce a number of slides to show it. But essentially, I'll try to, if you've got crusts like this, and you've got the opening of the oceans, oops, I'm trying to balance my hands. I'm not trying to move, there you go. Nope, there. You get this effect. So as the surface curvature flattens, the radius increases and the surface curvature flattens. Oops, I'll get my fingers. There we go. Flattens. You get a flattening of the outer surface of the continents, and this is where your mountain chains are. These are mountain chains along the full length of the continents. The what do you call it? Cordilleran's in the west coast of North and South America, our own Great Dividing Range in Australia, ancient ranges in the Appalachians in Eastern America and Europe, etc. These are all where you get this change in flattening of the curvature and an increase in elevation. But prior to that, when the continents were together, if you get a flattening effect, you get compression in that direction. So as the continental crusts flatten, as the radius of the Earth increases, that's where you get the crumpling and folding and faulting and whatnot. Then that's preserved, then that parts company, and here's your mountains preserved on each of the adjoining continents. That, in a nutshell, is what mountain building is all about. Having said that, you would expect some thickening along the margins of the continents because that's where it's preserved and it's thickened prior to being opening up, whereas the central parts of the continent, most of the continents, are thin because that's where your erosion is. You erode from the centre out towards the margins. So I hope I've sort of answered that question.
Yeah, well, mountain ranges are quite controversial.
That is a whole different. That's a whole different topic and subject in its own
Oh, of
right.
course. I mean, the whole it is fascinating subject actually because
The other thing,
you have.
the other thing that these professor friends have noted is most of these mountain belts, as you flatten these mountains along mountain belts, you then introduce erosion along these belts here, and then you start getting the mountains, the valleys and whatnot in there, and erosion and etc. So you get plateaus, and then as the curvature changes again, and you start to get the margins depressed below sea level again, you get more sediment deposited here. So that becomes your unconformity and your plateau and unconformity. And then you get an increase again, uprise, and the whole thing's cyclical. But yeah, it's quite a complex process, but it's it all fits in beautifully in expansion tectonics. There's no need for random wham bang crash bang tectonics.
Well, there's also a couple of Indian scientists, right, who are going against the grain, which is the India's went sliding up and crashed in, and that formed the mountains. That I remember that. Also, I saw this YouTube way back of a person putting sort of a mud on a balloon and letting it sort of dry a little bit. Yep. And then when you inflate it, what you find is that the curved surfaces, when they uncurve, they literally crumple.
That's
and
correct.
They form mountains.
Well, actually, right. They'll form a network of belts, like a soccer ball, like the joins of a soccer ball, the patches
Right.
on a soccer ball. So much like that, as it first introduced by Sam Carey 50 years ago.
Right. That he was the one that had that real famous a graphic where he showed the continents where you had the bowl in the middle, you had the
That's right.
forming of the United States, Australia, other places around the world where
That's
this
right.
was noticed. And he had that soccer ball. They also had
Yep.
one with
That's what
I
I'm
think
alluding to. Yes.
yeah, and then there was one with like a tree where that
Yeah.
grew out, and you saw the peeling of the bark and all that. And so, just the mechanics, really, there's a whole side of expansion tecton. I mean, there's just so many sides. Expansion tectonics affects, looking at the mechanics, right, of what materials do when these expansions happen. There's also the plant flora and fauna as well. And that in itself is gives us a lot of clues. Dennis McCarthy, who's actually his expertise is in Shakespeare, but he gave a talk to us about in 2008, a while back, about 12 years ago, where he talked about one. I think it was a lizard or something that could not swim it dies. It would die or something like
Of
that
course.
in the salt water. And he was on one island in the Pacific and then on the South American coast. And it lined up perfectly with expansion tectonics. There was also flora that if it were to float in the water, it would die. But it too was on these seemingly disparate areas. And it seems to me that when expansion tectonics is finally accepted, which it will be, it's going to change
Oh, absolutely.
paleontology, it's going to change biology, it's going to change physics. And this is one of the reasons I love this whole idea of expansion tectonics, because you can't it not only breaks open geology, it breaks open physics, cosmology, everything.
It's you're absolutely right, and in I think it's my third or fourth talk, I'll be introducing fossil distribution throughout the world on my models. But getting back to what you mentioned a moment ago, example with can't remember what you said, who this
Oh, it
fellow
was
was.
like the balloon.
No, never mind. Back in about 95, when I was doing making my models, I was up to Jurassic, and at that time, New Zealand. And prior to that, New Zealand was docked against the east coast of Australia, and you have the northern end of New Zealand like that, the Bay of Islands and where else?
Yeah.
Bay of Islands, etc. up here. And anyway, I had an email from a fellow in New Zealand. I think he was a professor, but he's retired now. But he's working with what the high up research. Anyway, he had his students up in this northern end, and they come across a dinosaur vertebra. And well, actually, they did that, but he also specialised in ammonites, which are little fossil shells. And he came to me. He said, "Look, he's got a bit of a quandary because this particular variety of ammonite only occur in this Bay of Islands, this northern section of that way around, this section here of the northern end of New Zealand, and around Mexico." And I was in a quandary, and it was perfectly timed because New Zealand was a bit of a floater in the Pacific Ocean. I could sort of have it a number of different ways. Anyway, when he mentioned this, I was just here we have Mexico, and here we have New Zealand right there. So
Oh my
this
goodness.
side we've got New Caledonia and all that there.
Is that on Baja?
I don't. Yeah,
Baja
well,
California. Because Mexico has that like peninsula, right?
yeah, but this is prior to that. This is
Okay.
the actual assemblage prior to all that.
Oh, I got you.
Etc. So anyway, these fossils here match these fossils here, sort of thing, precisely. So I was very appreciative of this fellow because he pointed me in the right direction as to where I should put New Zealand, and it fitted absolutely perfectly. So yes, that was my own example, a really good example of what you mentioned about before about lizards not being able to swim very far in the ocean, and here's a fossil species that do exactly the same.
Right. And you've got, of course, all the work by Stephen Hurl, who
Yeah.
shows that. I mean, it's amazing to me how many disparate professions. Here you've got a guy who's a mechanical engineer, and he ends up before the internet, when you didn't have all this information instantly available, even on your phone in your pocket. He was drifting toward the idea that the Earth had to be less gravity and less mass. And then he, with his calculations, run across the expansion tectonics. And it amazes me. It just constantly amazes. And then that's why I get excited when I see, if you have that model in mind and you watch the science articles come out. Once in a while, you get that, like the Australian one, right? The Australia and Canada. Oh, that's crazy. And then you start to realize if you just keep your eyes open, you're going to find more and more data. It's funny because instead of coming up with data that goes against, it actually always helps the picture of expansion tectonics.
There's another fellow here in Perth, David Knoll. I don't know if you've come across him. He is essentially a botanist, and his passion is fruit and nut trees. And he's got something like 18,000 from memory
Wow.
locations of all these nut trees all over, ancient nut trees and fossil nut trees all over the world. And he came to the conclusion that the Earth is increasing in radius over time for exactly the same reason as Stephen did, because he was getting populations of say, palm trees over here in wherever, palm trees here on one side of the world, Pacific, and palm trees over there in the other side of the world. And when you put them together with expansion tectonics, they come together. But from a plate tectonic perspective, in order to get from here to there, they have to go all the way around there. Or swim across or something like that. So yeah.
That's where you get those gyrations where you see, I think, that's why they don't do many animations, because if they go back in a little bit, you've got Australia's a big problem. I mean, besides generating radical thinkers like yourself, which is already a problem, you have the problem of the Pacific, because Pangea, of course, has the idea that they all stick together strangely. I mean, which doesn't make sense. Why would you have a planet? I mean, I've never seen a planet in a science fiction movie where they fly by and there's it's all ocean except for one big island in the middle. I mean, it doesn't, even intuitively as human beings, we're not planet builders. We get this that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what you have is Australia is a great example, because if you match it on the East Coast and then on the West Coast on two things that should be separated by a gigantic Pangean ocean, whatever that was called, you have no way to do that. What do you do? Like move it over there for a few things, and then it came back. It sort of went on a trip, and then
Just give me 1 second.
Okay, no problem. So we are here today with Dr. James Maxlow. If you haven't,
Back.
He's back already. If you haven't read about him, you should get his book. I'm going to print this up and I'm going to bring it right back, of course. This book is upside down. This book is James Maxlow, Beyondplate Tectonics. If you have not gotten and get it, down here, and I'm going to do this, James. This is something I'm going to show everybody. Down here, people may wonder what the heck that is. Well, I know exactly what it is, because I have in my hand here something that a lot of people probably don't know. Those animations, people I think would assume would be graphics. Here you can see North America and Australia, South America. Let's see if I can get Australia on there. But this is a model made by James Maxlow. There's Australia right there. And you can see it's the same kind of thing he was moving. So what you see in that, when you see these animations going around, it's a real styrofoam ball, I think, or something, or maybe he
Yep.
made his,
Yep. Styrofoam.
and
Yes.
he has cut it out and done this by hand. So when he's talking about models, he's talking about real physical models. And of course, I think there is a project. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Isn't there a project? I think it's headed by Stephen Hurl that is a three-dimensional globe in computer modeling. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
Can you
correct.
tell us a
I'm
little
not
bit about that?
I'm not so sure what stage he's up to now, but there's actually a number of people, probably maybe two or three people, who have tried to model this on computer. And if you could show that globe again, David, just show that up again. I'll show that by assembling those crusts there. Just turn it around down a bit. No, keep going around. Yeah, a bit more. There. So there. Hold it there. You can model this on computer, but by the time you start getting back too far back in time, the actual distortion, crustal distortion, becomes a little bit too complex for computers. He's done an absolutely brilliant job, and I think you can access the work he's done on his website.
Who are you talking about?
Stephen Hurrell.
Okay, Stephen Hurrell.
www.dinox.org.
Dinox.com. Yeah, I have that. I can get that up there. Yeah,
Something like that.
right.
And I think you can access that. You can still access it. Used to be able to. And he's working on it steadily. There he is. He's been working on that for quite some time, but you can only do that for the probably the past maybe 100 million years of crusts confidently. By the time you get further back than that, it starts to get a bit more complicated because of the distortion factor in the crusts.
Yeah, I think what's going to what's going to have to happen, because I'm a computer scientist myself, we're going to have to eventually get computer scientists to know how to model it, and the way you're going to have to do it is going to be different from the way it's done now. I think a lot of times right now it's more like laying graphics on top of a spherical object. And I think what we're going to need to do is literally make what we call wire frames for the surface, just like where you see here. You're going to see wire. We can make those into wire frames, and as things get smaller, we can then adjust where those edges go as well. So it's not going to. I think it's very difficult to try to make it into, how do you say, a physicality, so that you just put the how do you say, put the continents there, and as you grow it, the computer program will figure out how to make those smaller. I think we're just going to have to eventually have it so that people, the way I envision it, you would have the global Earth where you can then move those things. So when you get to a certain point, you can actually move the edges if you need to do that, because of the way things would be. And we'll have to use more of our brains to do that, because, to model that physically and give it physics would be really hard. And then at that time, I think what we would be able to do is we could start mapping the flora and the fauna, so that when you get to a certain point in the history, you'll understand, and people who are paleontologists will understand, oh, this could have been one of the reasons the dinosaurs died off, is because that cracking and made the herds and the different ways that they would migrate. These things will affect, just like the guy with the nut trees, right? He'll be able to go and say, I think he'd love it. He'd be able to go into the model and start making his own world there. That is, you could go in and make a layer, and he could start putting all the nut trees and all the flora that he's found, and not only map it, but map it on the changing. I mean, that would just be fantastic. It's not an easy problem. We got to find funding for it.
That's right. With the amazing stuff that the movie people do with their graphics and animations and stuff. To me, what you're talking about there would be bread and butter, just very simple process for people.
Well, yeah, I don't want to burst your bubble, but it is different. It'd have to be
Oh,
different
sure.
because what happens, the way they do it is very different. Wouldn't be amenable to this. I know a lot about computer graphics, so but it's not hard what we're talking about. So the graphics that we're talking about in the way to do this, you would just basically first come up with a model where you would start at today, go down, and what we would do is allow geologists or yourself to go in there, tweak around with the surface. So all of these things that are drawn here, they would be line segments, and
Yeah.
those line segments could be tweaked, and as they go down and go down, and then once everyone's happy with those line segments and the way things are, then you would then allow people to go in and log in, create their own account, start putting mappings on there of
Data.
flora and fauna and geology, all kinds of things. And then that person would only do it not only for that period, but another period. So then you could go in as a student and say, I want to look at what happens to the nut trees from this size to this size and watch what happens. And people can write dissertations on that. It would be incredible. So it would be definitely its own kind of
It
thing.
is. It is fascinating. It is. You're absolutely right, David. In I think my third and fourth presentation, I'll be introducing data, exactly what you're talking about. I manually plotted, I think, 10,000 ancient pole measurements on my globes and about 9,000 fossils
Wow.
all over the world on these
Wow.
globes. And that's, you can see the outcomes of that research on my website. There's some lovely interactive models there, which show that exactly what you're talking about.
I think what needs to be done is just for people to know. Let me go up here. ExpansionTectonics.com. If you go to that, you can read your you read about that's your website, correct? You own that?
That's correct. Yes.
That's great. James Maxlow, if anybody on planet Earth, expanding Earth should own it, it's you. But I'm helping them. My goal is the expansion tectonicists have been talking like this, and I welcome them over to us because we have a bigger audience to get people interested. But for our website that we have now, I'm going to be working with the expansion tectonicists group to put up a website very similar to the community website we have. And the idea there is that I think we can do is we can make a group on that new website, one of the groups, because you can make groups. And that group should be discussing how we can software-wise do this project. Because I think what we need to do is come up with a way in a program to do it, or look at what we have and get other people involved, try to get more people involved as a community project. So I think that's something we can look forward to with the new group. So you guys tell us a little bit about you guys have been meeting, and I've been watching that, and you are using Zoom. And I'm going to be talking with your group to use this platform. And this is one of the reasons I'm having you over here today, because during this time, we've had anywhere from 25 to 30 people live. So this is not, and those people are coming in and out. This would mean they're searching on Google, and all of a sudden they come across, who's this guy talking about it? So we're really trying to get you guys more into, the way things are working today. But you guys have a group of people. Tell us a little bit about your group that has been meeting online, especially with COVID. Tell us about who they are, what kinds of things are going on in the expansion tectonics world.
There's probably 10 or a dozen global distribution. We have 2 fellows in Poland, 1 in England, 3 or 4 in the States, myself here in Australia, 1 in Italy, I think a friend in Africa. So we're quite a widely spaced group. But what I find is, for example, whenever we get together on conferences, international conferences, for example, we we're people that are pushing our own wheelbarrows, so to speak. We have our own agendas. We have our own research projects that don't um, necessarily overlap and coincide with what other members are doing. And by getting together like this, we're slowly starting to mellow and cooperate. And we've only just started to have these podcasts, and really we're a bunch of amateurs in that respect. We're quite professional in the sciences, but typical
Sure.
scientists, to get your stuff out communicated is the difficult part. Actually doing the science is relatively easy by comparison. So coming across the likes of you, David, as you well know, I've known you for many tens of decades actually.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and you've been an absolute boom to us, and we're looking forward to joining forces with you
Yes.
to guide us and direct us in the right direction, and to tap into your valued member base as well. So yeah, we're quite looking forward to that.
Yeah, and
Bearing in
what?
mind,
Go ahead.
sorry, we're all rather elderly
Right,
now.
right, right.
Most of us are around about my age plus,
Sure.
and we're all retired. Most of us retired, and it's a sort of not a well-known, but a bit of a comical joke in the sciences. If you don't agree with somebody, if somebody's
Right.
causing problems in the profession, you just wait till they
So
die, and
die
then.
off. Right, right.
But unfortunately, they've all died off, but we're rapidly increasing in age as
Well, it
well.
is. Yeah, I
So we
mean,
have to sort of capture all this and now
yes,
while we're.
yes. It's really important because the CMP. I started with the dissident science. I met a gentleman, Dr. Carazani, who showed Einstein wrong back in the 1940s, and that's how I got into all this. Next thing I knew, and I looked at it, I go, yeah, this has got a lot of problems, and I got into it. But I've been around then since these dissidents for almost 30 years. It was 1992. So 2002 will be 30 years that I've been around people, and the NPA, which is now this organization called the CMPS, we've lost a lot of people, and it's sad. Ron Hash, for instance, who was really instrumental in getting the word out, especially about relativity, because he had 30 patents in GPS, and he's
Yep.
saying to everybody, "Folks, we don't use it. It doesn't work." And when you got a guy who's got, everybody says, "Well, what do you know about it?" You're saying that, but the theoreticians sit in their little cubes in their universities, writing little diagrams of how they think it should work, according to general relativity, and therefore, yeah, this is work. They just don't know what they're doing. But so yeah, but the problem is that even the dissidents themselves, eventually, those generations are changing. The good news is that I can tell you, and I think it's good because a lot of you still have many years left, is that getting into what we're doing and how we're doing it today does bring in new blood. A really good example of that is somebody who my father and I met, because my father and I have a model of the universe, which actually, one of the things I've asked you about is when you draw the one diagram I see that you draw is you draw arrows into the earth. Well, the magnetic field has a direction. So one of the things is if you notice when you look at a globe, and this is one thing I've talked with you, is that if you turn a globe over, which I have up here, I'm not going to get it; it'll all fall down on me. But if you look at a globe, anybody take a globe, turn it upside down, and notice how much land mass is at the southern hemisphere versus the northern. Now, one of our model says that magnetic flows are actually flowing particles themselves. They're actually what we call the electrons themselves, but that's flowing. Now, if it's the case that it's flowing, it's going to go more in one direction. So the mass that's gained is going to be more in one direction. Well, it seems it's not coincidental that the southern hemisphere. So that means has the magnetic field been going in different directions. Now, when we were talking about this, a young man came along and was really intrigued by our model, and he got in, and he is maybe his 30s, So he is extremely interested. Now he's seeing all this other stuff. He's seeing this. Now he's seeing expansion tectonics. So what we're doing is bringing in new people. The critical thinkers are out there, but we've got to get ourselves, like you said, one of the things we need to do is join forces. One of the critics I have is says to me, Dave, the only thing is you support all theories, even if they're wrong. And I go, wait a minute. That's the way we need to do it. The reason we don't go forward is we don't let people argue. If I had a student who was a younger student and they said they want to show the earth is flat, I would say, go for it. Because what they're going to do is they're going to try to show that, but that they're going to have to argue it. And it does, and people don't understand. I remember when I was a math student at Ohio State University, I tried to solve an insoluble problem that was only the length of a ellipse and the ellipse and the length. Well, you can only do that in an infinite series. Well, I tried to prove otherwise. I didn't do it. But what I learned in doing that was invaluable. And the reason we don't go and listen to expansion tectonics is a person, if like myself, wants to go to university, get a degree in geology, and say, I want to do my thesis on expansion tectonics. It's going to happen?
No.
So I think the good thing is what you're saying is what we're trying to do too, is let's join forces. And not only that, we have specific groups. We have the structures group, which is a really great group, which talks about structures. You put like spheres together. How come the structure of the molecules in rocks, why do they stay together? Why are some more stable than others? There are people, that's all structure. And we have a whole group that's involved there. So we're trying to, as a group, I'm helping them with their website. I'm helping you guys with your website. And we cross-fertilize in the sense of getting you guys over here so that people in our group, they didn't even know it. We have a lot of new people, James, that are watching us now on YouTube and on our group in our new website that looks more like Facebook, what young people like. They're all of a sudden saying, "Oh, there's this expansion." I didn't know that. I know it was in 2008. I saw or 2005, or between 2005 and 8, I saw Neil Adams videos, and that's how Yep. And that's how I got in. So the good news is to tell you, James, and all your friends who are in the older generation, which are the ones who usually stand up to the mainstream, unfortunately. But we have a couple of things, and that is we have the means to get out to everybody now. And that's what we're trying to do as a CMPS's job, is to make sure we open our arms to people doing serious work outside of mainstream. If you've got a model of the universe and you're working diligently on it and you have good ideas and there's math and you write a book, we're going to support you. Who's going to pick? The world will pick what is working. Science, humanity will finally say, no, plate tectonics isn't the right way, expansion tectonics is, and that will happen. But it is happening. Now, another question I want to talk to everyone about here is we are starting our university. We've started in 2018. Well, we had that idea, and now we have people starting to write courses. These courses are online. You can do it. Even a person like James in the older generation can do it. My dad's writing a course on it, James. He's 83. I think he's beaten you in the age group. So one of the things really important that you're talking about of this generation, let's look at where you are in your career, right, James? You've written the definitive geological book for the next couple hundred years. It's here. Now, what do you need to do? You've got to teach it to people. Because one of the differences between a book and a course is that you can walk a person through a course and then quiz them, right? You can say, you can give them a test, a quiz, and say, okay, you've now learned about mountain building as a lesson, right? Now you can ask them questions, because now you're going to go away with that, and then you're going to be able to not only read it and get in your mind, but you make sure as a student that you literally, as a teacher, you quiz them. You give them, okay, how about this? What would you do? Or answer these questions. So I'm really hoping, and I talked to you, and you seem to be interested.
Oh
We
yes,
can
I'm most interested. Yeah.
we can do this online. Look, it's happening with or without us. And the good thing is the brick and mortar is starting to crumble. People are getting real degrees, bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees online. Now, yeah, we don't have the ability to say that necessarily you get a PhD, but we can make courses that are that way, and eventually our university will get enough people there that it will become a real university, in my opinion. And the difference between this university and every other one on the planet is that if you want to come in and write your PhD thesis on how the Big Bang is wrong, you are absolutely welcome to do that. Now you have to argue your arguments, which is great. So you are interested. Have you ever thought about teaching a course in it, or what you would do?
I'm very interested in how you're structuring it. Yes, online type stuff, but actually teaching it openly at universities, I would never be accepted.
Exactly, but the thing is, today you can be accepted,
Mm.
and we know. I have my house. I just moved into it, and there's all kinds of things I got to do here and never did before. What do? I go to the internet, and I get to be able to do things that I none of us could have done by ourselves before, unless it was trial and error. So, the idea of actually we founded it in 2018. It's a John Chappell University and you get degrees in natural philosophy. Natural philosophy is what was called physics, but it encompasses everything. Natural philosophy is what are the systems in nature, right? That's what we're looking at.
Mm.
So I'm really happy to hear you that, because we've got it on.
I'm most looking forward to it. Yes.
Yes. So I know we have Ian there. Hey, Ian, I know you're sort of sitting there. Did you want to come on and make any comments? It would be interesting maybe to bring you up and just say hello. Maybe are you new to? Would that be okay with you? I think Ian Cohen, he has been here on the. I really admire him. He's from England. He's a really sort of a big thinker. I've heard him speak. Would you like to come on and maybe make a comment and what you've seen with and hear with what James has been talking about in Exponential Tectonics? So I'm going to add you to the stream. Hey, Ian.
Thank you very much, David and James. My fellow countrymen would be somewhat upset with you in saying that I come from England. I actually come from Ireland. But anyway, I suppose they're both equidistant from North America and Australia.
That's the same.
Yes, I think on a previous occasion, maybe it was the Hurrell talk, that I did confess that I was rather new to this subject, but I found it quite fascinating, and I think I have an open mind on the matter. I haven't really made up my mind about it. I took a few notes which were very specific. I might take the opportunity, with your permission, of mentioning them, and perhaps James can respond. The point perhaps has been dealt with, but I noticed at the beginning of your lecture, James, you said something about in the 1960s, when the view was about continental drift. So I'm just wondering, in the intervening period, has that been less pronounced in the mainstream, and maybe is it more amenable to your ideas? I don't know. Perhaps I'll go through these few points since I have the floor. I also commented or I noted that the exponential growth and the extrapolation to 500 million years hence, that we might have the same diameter as maybe Jupiter or something like that. I'm just wondering, have you looked at further afield? I mean, obviously this exponential growth does go up to infinity, and if one extrapolated this to eons in the future, would other factors come in to mitigate the expansion ad infinitum? The other point which might have brought came to mind in relation to that was that if these particles from the sun are going all over the place into the planets, obviously the sun is getting smaller. So would your estimation be in excess of the conventional estimation just of the loss of material from the nuclear fusion of the sun? Sorry to be putting all these points, about half a dozen of them or so. The other point was where you look at, I think one of the questions was, is this happening to other planets? And you conceded that it was. But I'm just wondering, is the sort of time constant of the other planets different? Like, as you say that in 500 million years, we'll be about Jupiter's size or something. And I'm wondering, because of the different constitutions of the other planets, I mean, you have sort of quasi-terrestrial planets, maybe the inner planets, and the outer planets are gaseous planets. So, would they have quite a different time constant? In other words, would they be growing at a much slower or a much faster rate? Also, one thing is you kept on talking about the radius of the Earth, increasing radius and so on, obviously on the assumption of it being spherical. But since it's an oblate spheroid, I'm just wondering, in your model over these large periods of time, is the ellipticity changing? Is the ratio between the semi-major and semi-minor axes remaining constant, or is the Earth getting more spherical or less spherical? Those are the very specific questions I must concede that I meant. So you might want to say a word about them. I'd be most interested.
Okay. With regard to the sphericity issue, I think, no, I haven't looked at that, and I don't think it can be modelled at all back in time at all. But it's an interesting point, because I think that the oblate spheroid shape of it at the moment may be, how can I explain it? I can do it with my hands. There we go. Way back in the Permian, we got opening up of the Pacific Ocean, and then starting to open up the Atlantic Ocean, and then an Indian Ocean, and Arctic Ocean, like this. So I think that's where your oblate spheroid comes into it, where you're getting more continental crust on one side and so on and so forth. Getting back to the planet itself, an exponential curve, of course, you're simply changing one axis to that axis. You eventually hit that. I seem to be back to front here. You're flat lying and then a rapid increase. So that's where time changes direction, and where that direction goes and heads off, I don't know, of course. But it's an interesting point. I always visualize the Earth as a transition between the rocky inner planets and the gaseous giant planets. And I also envisage, say, the asteroid belt as maybe a failed planet. So at some stage, this particular planet may have increased in size, but not being as gaseous as the giant planets and the Earth are. It may have failed and fragmented and simply crumbled up, and you're getting an asteroid belt. Of course, this goes against cosmology and astrophysics, etc. But it's just something that I contemplated about, and I can't even remember any of your other questions.
There's one point that both of you, it's interesting, because I've talked about this with other people even 10 years ago. Now, if you look at, we are a rocky planet going to a gaseous one, sort of like going to a Jupiter. Now, if you look at Jupiter, here's something to blow your mind, Ian. This is one of the ideas. The idea is, as these things are expanding, and they're doing it in different rates, if you look at Jupiter, let's just look at Jupiter and pretend we don't have the Earth, okay? It's got a lot of moons, right? those moons are growing as well. In fact, one of those moons, I don't know if it's Saturn or Jupiter, astronomy and astronomers and NASA said they know it's growing. Okay, and
But they
so
don't admit it, though. They don't
right,
admit it,
right.
though.
Well, no, but they've said it.
That-
NASA said it. Yeah,
yeah,
but
that
Ganymede, there's two of them.
the ice planet
Right,
is a classic example. You're getting all the fractures. The
right,
initial fractures is what in my next talk I will be introducing global fractures on the early Archean Earth, and that I see those fractures and I see the initial stages of expansion of that particular moon. A classic example of fracturing due to increasing radius. But
Right.
of course, plate tectonics won't accept that. They won't consider that.
but the point I was going to make is that as Jupiter gets bigger, the idea I'll just tail it right off. Jupiter will get so big it's going to ignite, turn into a star, and all the moons turn into planets. That is one of the things I've heard. Now, how long that would take, would it really happen? Because most of the star systems in the galaxy, a majority of them are two or more stars. That's a fact. We know that now. That when we look in the sky, we think it's all those. The sun is a very, how do you say, it's abnormal. Now, if it's the case that if you have a Jupiter and then for some reason it ignites and starts up, and then you have those planets, and then the sun goes the other way. I mean, who knows? It is an interesting thought, Ian. I
believe, David, already that Jupiter is actually giving off more energy than it's receiving. It's sort of a quasi-sun. It's giving off a very small amount of energy.
Right. And then so I'm not saying that this is right. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying people have talked about it. So that's an interesting point that I think people make. I think the other thing is too is when you were mentioning Ian about the plate tectonics in the 1960s. I mean, James can talk about that a lot more. 1960s was really pivotal in this whole tectonics area because at that point they were literally in the 1960s. If you look at Hurl's latest book, they literally had, it was Nature or Time magazine or something like that, had in it, or Life magazine, had in it expansion tectonics in the 60s.
Called Expanding Earth. Called
Right,
Expanding Earth.
exactly. So in the 60s, they were really contemplating that. And then there was something that happened between that and the next decade that completely wiped off the idea of expanding Earth. And my own feeling, and maybe James he's much more expert, but my own feeling, the reason why was people were way too uncomfortable with the idea that the Earth was expanding. I think people just emotionally could not grasp that. Do you have some thoughts on that transition?
That's exactly right, David. The other thing is, at that time, global data was in its infancy, and I always 1967 is when I was in late high school, just prior to university, and I recall my father gave me my first slide rule. So that was the state of the art at that time, slide rules in 1967. And plate tectonics was introduced in, I think, 65 or 66, in an era where slide rules were normal. And of course, the scientific universities, etc., they had their primitive computers and whatnot, but the amount of data available at the time was just nowhere near as the volume-wise as it is now. And the computing ability was nowhere near what it is now. So while there were a number of people who were seeing the raw data coming up from the seafloor crusts, etc., seeing that and contemplate or considering an expanding Earth, and I don't use that term expanding Earth now because it's sort of a dirty word now these days. That's why I introduced expansion tectonics. But they were contemplating an expanding Earth to to justify to explain this data that was this enormous amount of data that was coming up from the oceanographic stuff. Anyway, people just could not contemplate. They were only just coming to grips with
That's right.
the fact that continents could move.
Right.
To take it to that next step,
I
to
remember you saying
visualize
that.
it moving because the Earth is expanding, that was
I
a
got you.
quantum
I remember. I remember
And-
that. Yeah, I
and
remember
there
you
was
said that.
just a few people said, nope, can't be happening. It's just impossible. The rocks, and they also considered the continental crust, for example, was considered as solid rock. So how can you change the shape and expand solid rock? Those ideas have all changed now. But what I find is, and since then, well, prior to that, there was a number of researchers, Ott Christoph, which is a number in the 30s. There was a researcher who modelled expanding Earth. He made models, and then Klaus Vogel in the 70s and 80s into the 90s, he made models, and with Klaus, his modelling coincided with the first introduction of global geological mapping, and my work started in the early to mid 90s, where this mapping that I keep alluding to on my slides, that came into being in 1990. So in 1995, I visited Klaus in his home in East Germany, and I took my early models, not these ones, earlier ones, with me, and we compared and contrast, and they were virtually identical, as they should be.
Sure.
So if you have the modern data, if you have the
Sure.
modern mapping data, anybody
Sure.
can do it, and they come up with identical stuff.
Well, you're going to, because the map. Look, we literally have a map of how the Earth expanded. I mean, you can't go against it. There's no logical way.
But prior to the 60s, that mapping wasn't available.
Right.
So the people that were the scientists that were modeling and expanding Earth were doing it visually. They were grabbing chunks here and chunks there and joining it here, and multiple plate fit options. And then, of course, paleomagnetics came along with their paleopole data, and they were able to generate apparent polar wander paths, and they had some confidence in locating and assembling these crusts using apparent polar wander data. And but unfortunately, they're stuck in a rut. That's what they use to quantify their assemblages, even to this very day, and they just don't use geology. I've seen some of their assemblages where they start off using this geological map, and then they get to the next model and there's no mapping. They don't use any mapping of the seas because it doesn't fit.
Yes,
it just doesn't fit. It does. You only have to go back 10 million years, and the data.
You're screwed right there. You're screwed right there.
Screwed right up. That's right.
Yeah.
So they turn a blind eye to this geological information, and as I think I alluded to in my talk, most of these paleomagneticians are physicists or geophysicists,
right? Yeah.
in their own right. There's very few who have geology training.
So basically, you want to understand. In fact, that was for those, especially. I'm going to switch just to me here. For those who want to learn about the history of Earth expansion, this book is a gem. I know Jem thinks that too. This is what Stephen Hurl did to put together all the people who've been working on Earth's expansion over the last decades. This is a gold mine. In fact, this is one of the things we need to teach. I'm going to talk with Stephen Hurl to teach a course in this, the history of Earth expansion. And I think one of the things that I now remember is that in the early 1960s, like you said, the older guard, who were the people in charge and looking at the plates and all that, They were getting bombarded by this new idea that they would even move at all, let alone their expansion.
Right.
And then they were getting all this data. And then on top of it, they're going to have to explain not only they're moving, but the Earth's expanding. That was too much for them. It was
Gotcha.
too much for them. But obviously, it wasn't too much for everybody, right? Because other people hung on to it, and those people who still hung on to it, they went. Now, here's an interesting question. Before we're coming up on like 6 minutes left here, but in the area of physics, for instance, relativity. And when I made my movie Einstein Wrong in 2005, I had my mom. I took her on a journey to meet all these scientists. I had my mom call up all the universities, and all she did was say, "I want you to find a person who's an expertise in relativity." I gave her 50 universities a call. Put my camera on the tripod, have her turn it on, and she went on talking. We couldn't find any. Nobody is an expert. No one makes a living. There's only one person on the planet who makes a living. His name's Kip Thorne. He's like 174 years old, and he won a Nobel Prize because they slipped him in on that whole, gravity wave stuff. But you call up universities, no one specializes in it. And yet Einstein's supposedly the biggest guy in the world. There's no one writing theses on him. There's no industry really using it. GPS doesn't use it. NASA doesn't really use it. People say they do. So I'm imagining what's happening. In fact, in my movie, the advanced physics class in Long Beach, California, skipped all 43 pages of relativity. And I asked the guy why. He says, nobody cares about it. Is it the case, is plate tectonics in the universities slowly dying because they are so lost, and that it's
so
really
academic.
generational?
It's buried in academia, and in all my 40 years of professional geology experience, I have never used plate tectonics at all, and none of my colleagues or the young people use plate tectonics. It's just like exactly what you mentioned with relativity.
Yeah.
It's just there in the background. It's just part of the course. So you just got to accept it,
Right.
and put up with it. And
No,
leave it at that.
here's a really good question now. We can end it because this is the practical side. Does Dr. James Maxlow, the geologist, now use expansion tectonics? And I know you're not working anymore, but in your mind you're doing geology. You can't help it. If I walked out with you to the Grand Canyon, believe me, you would be standing there for an hour on one part of the rock. When you are doing that in your mind, is expansion tectonics part of that thought process now?
Oh, it definitely is. And it's an interesting point, because if I had this information back in the, say, 1960s, 60s, 70s, where there was a boom in exploration, I would be an ultra billionaire by now, because I would have been able to highlight all where these world-class gold, copper, deposits are throughout the world. The problem I find is when I plot all these locations on my globes, they've already been found.
It was just randomly found, right? Yeah. Oh, that's not good. Not only did expansion tectonics go by the wayside, but your wealth was your chance of being ultra rich has gone away.
But having said that, of course, biogeography, geography, and climatology, and all that are all applicable to what I'll be showing you in the next couple of three podcasts. I'll be showing you examples of all of these,
right?
And it all fits together. It's brilliant stuff, when you put it all together on a proper model.
Yeah, well, listen, this is always a conversation that I could go on, but my daughter has her birthday parties coming up for 2 days, and if I don't get off of this, I'm going to be in the doghouse. But it was a great pleasure to talk with you. I can sit and talk with you for hours and hours at end. I will say again, and I do this, and it's really sad, but in some sense, it's great, is that I want to tell you, you are recognized by many people in the science community, critical thinkers, as one of the great critical thinkers of all time in geology, if not the best. And I mean, it's not something you set out to do, but I think one of the things that you have, that I have, and many other people have, is no one's going to tell me what truth is. I need to find that out for myself. You can tell me in a school, you can tell me over and over, you can teach it in every class in the land. But if things don't point to that and point to something else, then I'm not going to listen. And I think that's what you did, and thank goodness you did. And we look forward to more talks with you in the coming weeks. We look forward to building the community, the Expansion Tectonics website, and getting that as a vibrant community like what we're doing. I really appreciate your confidence in what we're doing here. And I again want to thank you. We did give you a Lifetime Achievement Awards, and that was certainly well deserved. So thank you very much. And what can we look forward to in coming talks?
Oh, look at that! It's just turned midnight.
So it's tomorrow. We're not gonna get you. You have to finish here. Finish here. What can we expect from your talks?
My next talk, I'll be showing you modeling continental crusts, and this has never ever been done at all throughout history. So this is what I'll show you is absolutely unique, one-off. From that, I'll start to drape what I call global observational data from geophysics, climate, geography, biogeography, fossils, etc., draping these on my models to show you the distribution and how they fit, how they all fit. The primary aim during my PhD research days, of course, you come up with a set of models, but if your data doesn't fit, your models are wrong. So
Right.
what I did was I used the data to quantify the models, and they definitely quantified the models. So what I'll be doing is highlighting this in these next 3 talks.
Yeah, and I think what's going to be great is all these things that you're doing are perfect segues into putting together a course. So a person could basically go through and learn this stuff in depth. And I think that's just going to be absolutely fantastic. I see many people in your position who are great minds. Glenn Borkert on infinity, yourself in geology. We have people in structures. We have people in other areas that are people with models. So again, thank you so much. I do have a person who says they're good at graphics. Dr. James, person's Dryas. So Dryas, if you want to help out, if anybody wants to help out with anything, I'm sure it will be welcomed by everyone. Get in contact. You can go to expansiontectonics.com right there. Get a hold of James. Anybody who wants to help or join in. James he has promised, be getting registered and signed up for our site, so he can get his feet wet in there and answer any questions that we have, because we do have a group. And in on that site, if you haven't been there, let me put those sites up here for everybody to see. Those are not it. I'm sorry. That's our YouTube channels. Naturalphilosophy.org is where our community is, and you can discuss things hopefully with James. He'll be on there in the next couple days. And then if you want to read about something, you can go to Science Woke. And also, for those people who don't know, James has written. I forced him. I got some of my strong men in Australia who were pretty mean dudes to get him to do this. But if you go to wiki.naturalphilosophy.org, it has an encyclopedic entry, a Wikipedia entry for Expansion Tectonics. It's the best on the planet, of course. That's what our Wikipedia is for. And believe it or not, our Wikipedia is closed because the moment you open it, the people they want consensus. They don't want critical thinking. So if you want to take a look at that, James, again, thank you so much. We're going to end this, bring you down here, and we'll be having James coming up in the following weeks. I'm not sure which week, because we have many people lined up. We have Stephen Bryant, who wrote Disrupting Physics. He's getting ready to come on our Saturday mornings here. If you are a person who has something to talk about, we're lining up. We're already probably done through October, already into November. Please get in contact with us. You'll be welcome here if you're doing serious science and people in mainstream aren't listening to you. And I want to thank all my subscribers from Dissident Science YouTube channel, and of course all the members of the CMPS who support this. If you want to support us, go to our website at naturalphilosophy.org. You can sign up, and you can actually pay an annual membership as modest as $35 all the way up. And we do have people doing that because these things, including this broadcast, our websites, the servers they're on, and all the things that benefit our community are paid through by our community. And if they don't like the job I'm doing, they can get rid of me. So, which my wife would probably like. But I do want to thank everybody. I want to thank again Franklin Hugh and the group that has been doing this for the last couple of years, keeping this alive. It's been great, greatly appreciated. And I invite everybody to remember to be critical thinkers and to not let us tell you what is good or important or true. You have to figure it out yourself. If you want to read about expansion tectonics, the book on that is, again, the Beyondplate Tectonics by James Maxlow. That is the book, the best book in geology I think ever written. And if you want the history of it, which again, I'm going to get Stephen Hurl to write a course in that, so you can take the history of expansion tectonics at our university. You'll be able to do that in the next coming year. I'm putting the software together for commercial software to do that. And if you have a theory or a paper or anything that you want to talk on, you get an hour on this channel every Saturday morning. It broadcasts live across 4,000 subscribers on YouTube and many hundreds on Facebook page, and that is constantly growing. We can give you that platform to talk, and then you'll be able to interact. So I thank you, and thank everybody with the comments here today. Greatly appreciated. And we're going to end this broadcast. And everyone, stay critical, stay thinking. I'm Dave D. Hilster. I'm your science therapist. Ciao for now.